hearing of the Readiness Subcommittee of the Armed Service. Wait a minute, excuse me. I got a countdown. Okay. Is the media service video? We're on. Ladies and gentlemen, I call to order this hearing of the Readiness Subcommittee of the House Armed Services Committee. Without objection, my prior remarks will be read into the record about how we have to operate. Now, the council is happy, or at least I'm going to be able to debate with them. I'm going to move directly to my opening statement. I don't see our ranking chairman on yet, but we'll be, hopefully will be by the time I finish my statement. With that, let's get us up and operating. Military readiness covers a vast breadth of topics, many of which we have covered in depth in other hearings. One of the through lines of this committee's work is finding the right balance between sustainment of existing platforms and facilities and the modernization necessary to meet the threats of tomorrow. While it's important that we invest in systems and equipment that will put us at the cutting edge, we must never forget or ignore our current arsenal. Upgrading and updating these systems are a must if we hope to be successful in any near-term engagement. This balance is the very essence of readiness, and our preparations for near-peer competition require nothing less. The same can be said of our installations. A major theme of my work as chairman over these last couple of years has been prioritizing installation resiliency. For years, the services have taken considerable risk in the installation portfolio, deferring necessary maintenance and upgrades on existing buildings in order to fund new platforms and systems. Deferring maintenance is a chronic issue. We see this across the entire Readiness Subcommittee's jurisdiction. The services consistently fail to fund sustainment, and I look forward to hearing from each of the witnesses today if your budget request reflects the status quo or if the necessary investments are being made so that when the next Hurricane Michael or Hurricane Florence hits, our installations will remain more resilient. Another theme of the committee's work is to ensure that the military services continue to have the resources they need to effectively train our servicemen and women. Our personnel are the most important part of our armed forces, and it's imperative that they have the proper preparation for whatever future fight they may encounter. That includes the right investments in everything from basic training to flight hours and everything in between, as well as what happens on our nation's ranges. As we look to the future, we know that the field of battle will change and will require the necessary training to ensure that our service members are ready. As this committee and the military addresses these three principal concerns, we must be aware and vigorously address an overarching challenge that addresses and dramatically affects all three of these principal areas. That challenge is the fact of a rapidly changing climate. The Department of Defense is the single largest consumer of carbon energy in America and quite possibly the world. Therefore, to meet the climate crisis, every service must seek to reduce energy consumption with conservation strategies and quickly move to non-carbon energy sources. This has been and will continue to be the central theme of this committee during my chairmanship. I would appreciate each witness sharing with this committee how they intend to address this challenge. As I scrutinize your budgets, I do not see the necessary commitment. And finally, along these lines, over the past year and a half, the world has been forced to confront a challenge that it has not seen in over a century. The COVID-19 effect on every facet of our way of life, and it has killed over 600,000 Americans. I look forward to hearing how each of the services have confronted this threat and weathered the global pandemic. More specifically, how did COVID-19 affect the readiness of our forces, both in a tactical and strategic sense? I see Mr. Lambourne has joined us. Doug, if you'd like, I can read that all again, or we can move directly to your statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm prepared to make my statement as you've just made yours, and thanks for having this hearing. Today, we will hear from the Service Vice Chiefs of Staff on the current state of military readiness and how the fiscal year 2022 budget request will support military training, weapons, systems maintenance, and efforts to meet readiness requirements in alignment with the National Defense Strategy. As DoD continues to shift its primary focus from countering violent extremist organizations to great power competition, our subcommittee remains very interested in how we are balancing current readiness with modernization investments. Unfortunately, the budget request did not continue the progress made under the Trump administration to rebuild our military by requesting a 3 to 5% increase over the inflation-adjusted fiscal year 21 enacted level. We cannot and should not ask our men and women in uniform to prepare to execute an array of missions and tasks and then fail to provide them with the resources necessary to accomplish those assignments. I strongly believe that we must continue to invest in our military as our adversaries grow, especially China. If we do nothing, over the next decade, China will fully modernize its military, potentially bringing it into parity with our own. I remain highly interested about the progress in standing up the new Space Force. This recognition of the importance of space as a warfighting domain is long overdue and is vital to the future readiness of the Joint Force. I am also looking forward to learning more about ways our newest service intends to increase the lethality and resiliency of our space assets, especially in light of increased competition and confrontation with Russia and China. In January of this year, the Air Force selected Huntsville, Alabama as the preferred basing location for the Space Force. Since that time, both the GAO and the DoD IG have begun reviews about the process by which that location was selected. As you know, I do believe that Colorado Springs was the best option, based on many factors ranging from location, civilian and military workforce, and the range of expertise in space warfare and operations, and specifically the existing infrastructure and capabilities that are located there, in addition to quality of life for service members and their families. So I eagerly await those reviews as we work to support and stand up this new service and rapidly reestablish SpaceCom to confront the existing and growing threats in the space domain. I was happy to see that the fiscal year 2022 operations and maintenance for the Space Force did include an increase of almost $1 billion over fiscal year 2021 enacted levels. I look forward to hearing how the department is contemplating and prioritizing readiness for its unique force design requirements as compared to the other services. I also look forward to hearing about any lingering or projected COVID-19 impacts to training and readiness of the service departments. COVID presented challenges to training, with many exercises being canceled, despite reports that there has been no degradation in readiness and that readiness levels are at historic norms. So there seems to be a discrepancy there that I would like to explore. One of our key readiness enablers is the organic industrial base. Our depots provide the capability to maintain warfighting capabilities throughout their life cycles, but recapitalization plans will require significant investment over many years at a time when we continue to have a number of other major funding challenges. I am committed to working with the chairman and the rest of the subcommittee to ensure that depot recapitalization is prioritized. Finally, and as I mentioned last year during our posture hearings, I'm concerned about people. Air Force pilot shortfall numbers have held constant over the last few years, unfortunately. The fighter community is experiencing the largest gap both in active and reserve components. It is unclear to me how we will reduce this backlog without robust funding, and I would like to hear more about that from the Air Force. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lamborn. I appreciate what you're saying. I particularly share your concerns about the location for Space Force. And certainly my view is that that entire process should be paused until we have those full reports from the two agencies. Now I'd like to introduce our witnesses. General Joseph Martin, Army Vice Chief of Staff; Admiral William Lesher, Navy Vice Chief of Naval Operations; General Gary Thomas, Assistant Commandant of the Marine Corps, General David Albin, Air Force Vice Chief of Staff, and General David D. Thompson, Space Force Vice Chief of Space Operations. With that, we'll go through and hear the opening statement from each of the presenters. We'll start with Martin, General Martin, and then we'll go through the list as I just introduced them. General Martin, you're up.
Chairman Garamendi, Ranking Member Lamborn, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, on the behalf of the Secretary of the Army, the Honorable Christine Wormuth, and the Chief of Staff of the Army, General James McConville, thank you for the opportunity to discuss the Army's readiness, and thank you for your steadfast support of our soldiers, families, and veterans. The challenges of the past year highlight the importance of having a ready Army. Our soldiers answered the nation's call by distributing vaccines and medical supplies to combat COVID-19, also supported local authorities during the civil unrest, responded to natural disasters, and helped secure our southwest border. Abroad, the Army has 105,000 soldiers deployed in over 140 countries as we speak, combating transnational terrorism, deterring adversaries, and strengthening relationships with our allies and partners. The Army is busy, and our ability to meet these challenges demonstrates a high level of readiness rebuilt over the past several years. We could not have done it without your steadfast support. However, readiness is fragile and relative to the challenges we face. Our adversaries are achieving significant military advancements and now threaten many of our long-held advantages. Technological progress is shifting the ground beneath our feet as we sit here and speak to each other. The world is changing, and the Army must change with it. To meet future challenges, the Army is undergoing the most significant transformation in the past 40 years. This transformation, the bedrock of future readiness, will enable the Army to support the Joint Force with credible land combat power necessary for deterrence and decisive victory. The next war will be an all-domain fight. History warns us not to rely on a single domain or any nuanced capability to win in combat. Victory in the future will require the application of combat power from all domains and the joint team. The size of the Army is equally important. The Army must maintain its end strength to meet the needs of the Joint Force. Even today, we're unable to meet all the global requirements asked of us. End strength reductions will further reduce our ability to provide the combat power requested of us and place excessive hardship on our soldiers and our families. I say the most important thing for last. People are our number one priority, and caring for them is a fundamental aspect of maintaining readiness. The harmful behaviors of sexual assault, sexual harassment, racism, extremism, and the factors leading to death by suicide directly affect readiness, and we must take them very seriously. We stood up the People's First Task Force to take a whole-of-Army approach to stamping out these harmful behaviors. We're on a solid path to build and maintain readiness now and in the future, but readiness gains and the Army's transformation require timely, adequate, predictable, and sustained funding to survive. Again, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I'm looking forward to your questions and working with you to ensure that your Army remains ready to serve the American people. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, General Martin. Your full testimony will be into the record, as will the full testimony of the other witnesses. I now turn to, just plain lost my list here. Let's go to General Thomas, and then we'll get back to the order on the list.
Chairman Garamendi, Ranking Member Lamborn, and distinguished members of this subcommittee, I'm pleased to appear before you today to discuss Marine Corps readiness and the FY22 budget. While common conceptions of military readiness often center on current availability of forces, we define readiness as the ability to create a warfighting advantage. The mere availability of Marines and equipment does not equal readiness to deter aggression or defeat rapidly evolving threats. As such, our focus is not on simple and short-term metrics of availability, but instead on our readiness to impose significant risks on our competitors and adversaries, both today and in the future. We must build a shared understanding of how we can best measure and achieve that readiness in order to prepare for the challenges ahead of us. We appreciate the support provided by this subcommittee as we made our initial force design changes and recovered readiness after years of steady combat deployments. Our FY22 budget request supports our continued force design efforts to enable naval and joint campaigning across the competition continuum in all domains. This force will be able to persist forward within the range of an adversary's weapon systems while providing reconnaissance, counter-reconnaissance, and long-range fires. While we have made much progress toward this goal, significant challenges remain in areas such as logistics sustainment, communications networks, and energy solutions.
Let's try that. No, yeah.
Through careful analysis and wargaming, we continue to implement the concepts, forces, and capabilities that will achieve forward presence, credible deterrence, and preserve our advantage at sea. Congressional support in these areas will further our progress toward our unique contribution to the joint force. Our modernization focus does not mean that we are neglecting the readiness of our current equipment, facilities, and missions. Our FY22 readiness accounts are fully funded, and we are committed to maintaining the combat credibility, safety, and overall readiness of the force while we modernize. Staying ready today and being ready for tomorrow will require consistent funding, prioritize and accelerated modernization, and the willingness to divest of capabilities that no longer serve our best defense interests. Your support and oversight of our readiness efforts will enhance and preserve the lethality of the Marine Corps as the nation's naval expeditionary force in readiness. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much, General Thomas. I think all of the members of this committee are aware there's a very, very significant change in the U.S. Marine Corps' posture going forward. We're going to be spending considerable time on working with the Marine Corps as they deal with a very different structure in the days ahead. I will come back to that. Admiral Lesher, I lost my place here, and you were the next up, so with my apologies, and with no offense to the Marine Corps, it's your turn, Admiral.
Appreciate it, Chairman. Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Garamendi, Ranking Member Lambourne, and distinguished members of the House Armed Services Subcommittee on Readiness. On behalf of the sailors, the civilians, and the families of the United States Navy, thank you for the opportunity to testify today on this important topic of readiness. Our nation depends on a Navy that maintains the advantage at sea. Then Navy worked hard to sustain today's strong readiness posture, but also to build on recent learning and best practices to drive improved readiness, performance, and outcomes. We see a strong opportunity to accelerate learning and momentum across our major warfare communities to improve the transfer function between the critical inputs in people, dollars, and infrastructure, and our key readiness outcomes. As an example, I think the committee is well aware of our aviation enterprise has achieved and sustained 80% mission capable rates in our squadrons across the majority of our aircraft models. Scaling across naval aviation, the key innovations, process changes, and leadership behaviors that we learned while improving Super Hornet readiness from the 55% baseline in 2018. We look forward to working with the defense committees to sustain and capitalize on these hard-earned gains, improving lethality in the high-end fight by balancing this increased mission-capable rates with the required increased flight hours for our pilots. And our float force, we also are leveraging this fundamental learning, the get wheel, get better tools embedded in Perform to Plan and Navy sustainment frameworks to improve performance in our public and private shipyards and in how we man the force. Since 2019, the Navy's achieved positive trends in on-time completion and reduced days of maintenance delay, working through significant COVID impacts in 2020. Yet clearly, our voyage to drive substantial shipyard maintenance performance improvement is at an early stage, and I see much opportunity and work to be done to close to the target of ships routinely completing maintenance on time at lifecycle maintenance plan design durations. We look forward to working closely with our private shipyard partners in this work to share systematic approaches for improving depot maintenance productivity. We're similarly focused on improving the manning of our surface ships. Since 2016, we've increased the billets assigned to surface ships by over 8,500, and we've assigned 3,000 additional sailors to operational sea duty. That increase in billets authorized drove a near-term decrease in the percentage of billets filled as we assess, trained, and deployed sailors to fill the new requirement while countering COVID-related pipeline friction. We're making strong progress. Today, we have the highest number of sailors on operational sea duty since 2014 and have reduced gaps at sea by over 4,100 since last October. It's not just about the inputs, however, also complementary to this progress. We continue with implementation of condition-based maintenance, with centers now aboard 94 ships, circadian rhythm watch bills to counter fatigue, and service maintenance experience assignment policy, building on what we learned with aviation maintenance experience metric to help sailors and billets afloat do their jobs better and more safely. Overall, the Navy's FY22 budget request funds our readiness accounts to an affordable level. It builds on these recent gains and it balances the need for future force readiness and modernization. I believe it's important to note that we will talk today about the consequence of the FY22 requests, which reflects a decrease in real terms from the 21 level, also a larger fleet. That is the context, along with our peer competitor, that drives many of the hard choices that you see in the request to maximize naval power. We're going to do a quick radio check. Did we drop offline?
We heard all that you said. Please continue. You were off for a few seconds.
Okay. Just to wrap it up, the 22 budget does include major aviation and ship readiness accounting increases, as well as training rate infrastructure, as you talked about, Chairman. The Found Range Training Complex in particular is a critical link that requires modernization to enable training to both our and our adversaries' newest capabilities. And so we look forward to working with the committees and other stakeholders to ensure our team is able to maintain the competitive edge with that training range. We have funding for shipyard infrastructure optimization, naval aviation infrastructure optimization to revitalize those facilities and equipment core to maintaining the fleet. And finally, to highlight our most important asset, the 700,000 sailors and civilians who provide our competitive edge. The request includes critical investments in training to include very relevant training, live virtual constructive training, as well as investments to increase the toughness and cohesiveness of our force with increases in mental health, sexual assault prevention, inclusion and diversity, and family care infrastructure to include fleet concentration area childcare. Overall, Chairman and Ranking Member and members of the committee, I look forward to discussing these topics with your committee today, and I thank the committee for your leadership and your partnership in sustaining focus on the core issue of keeping the greatest maritime fighting force ever ready to fight and win at sea.
Thank you very much, Admiral Lesher. We appreciate your testimony, and your written testimony, full written testimony, will be without objection in the record. Let me just do that for all of you. I forgot to ask permission from all of you. Without objection, written testimony will be entered into the record. So ordered. We now turn to General Alvin, Air Force Vice Chief of Staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Garamendi, Ranking Member Lamborn, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, on behalf of Acting Secretary of the Air Force, John Roth, and our Chief of Staff, General C.Q. Brown, Jr., thank you for the opportunity to testify on Air Force readiness and for your continued partnership and advocacy. Your Air Force mission is to fly, fight, and win to deliver air power anytime, anywhere our nation needs it. We remain committed to building the ready forces that can do just that, both to deter and respond to the threats of today and to address the even greater challenges of tomorrow. This year's presidential budget request builds upon our last 4 years of effort to restore readiness. We are pleased to report that despite some of the early impacts from COVID, in many areas, our readiness has largely been returned to pre-pandemic levels. To maintain the momentum on the progress that you made possible, we are focused on several key readiness drivers, all very familiar to this committee. First and foremost, we are focused on readying our most important weapon system, our airmen. Tomorrow's airmen will serve in some of the most challenging environments witnessed in generations. To win, it is critical that we ensure that nothing prevents them from reaching their full potential. This year's budget request sustains the Air Force's strong commitment to our airmen and their families, expanding funding for advanced training, ensuring ready access to safe and reliable family housing, and investing more than an additional $7 million in combating the deleterious behaviors such as sexual assault, interpersonal violence, and self-harm. As an Air Force, we must pay particular attention to the health of our aircrew manning, which continues to be at risk given the global aircrew manning shortages. This budget includes requests for continued retention measures, as well as several new initiatives to grow pilot production to the target of 1,500 aviators per year. At the same time, the PB22 budget request invests heavily in our training infrastructure to ensure that our airmen are prepared for peer-level combat. This budget funds the flying hour program to the max executable level and upgrades several of our training ranges, including notably both the Nevada Test and Training Range and the Joint Pacific-Alaska Range Complex. To ensure our airmen have ready equipment, we are continuing to invest in the weapon system sustainment, with this year's investment on par with those made in FY21 at $15.4 billion. We must note, however, that this program's funding is not keeping pace with the escalating costs. The total FY21 requirements grew by more than $800 million as we brought on new aircraft without retiring legacy platforms. This year's budget includes several recommendations to scale back our investments in that force structure, which is no longer relevant to the future fight, in order to affordably balance our weapon system sustainment accounts. Finally, we're making several key adjustments to our operational employment constructs to ensure our forces are optimally postured to build and sustain readiness for peer competition, including realigning the Air Force's force generation model back to the Joint Forces Reset, Ready, and Commit standard. This preserves our ability to execute more robust high-end training required for peer competition, while also enabling support of dynamic force employment taskings as envisioned by the National Defense Strategy. Again, thank you for your support. We remain committed to accelerating the readiness recovery this committee makes possible and working together to secure the highest returns on the considerable investments you make in our Air Force. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, General. We'll now turn to General Thompson, Space Force Vice Chief of Space Operations.
Chairman Garamendi, Ranking Member Lamborn, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today in my capacity as Vice Chief of Space Operations. On behalf of the Chief of Space Operations, General J. Raymond, and our Acting Service Secretary, the Honorable John Roth, and joined by the other service chiefs, vice service chiefs, it's a pleasure to provide you details on readiness for the newest U.S. military service. I'd like to begin by expressing my gratitude to Congress for its bipartisan support in establishing the U.S. Space Force on December 20th, 2019, and for your leadership in addressing the threats and challenges the nation faces in space. Year one of the Space Force's existence has been focused on standing up the new service. In collaboration with the services represented here, DoD staff, and Congress, the U.S. Space Force has made tremendous progress in this endeavor. This includes a mission-focused organizational structure, addressing force design and force generation models, new approaches to talent management, and the initial design and establishment of a field command solely focused on training and readiness, the Space Training and Readiness Command, colloquially known as STARCOM. Chief Raymond's direction to the U.S. Space Force in year two is fundamentally readiness focused and includes integrating the Space Force into combatant commands and with allies and partners, and training and developing Guardians as warfighters and effective joint force partners. In executing this guidance, the Space Force is doing the following. First, the Space Force is developing and refining operational models for presenting forces to combatant command. An important first step in this effort is U.S. Space Force's participation in U.S. Indo-Pacific Command's upcoming Pacific Century 2021 exercise, which will be the first major combatant command exercise with a Space Force service component. Second, the Space Force is in the process of standing up this new field command, STARCOM, which will have responsibilities to recruit, develop, train, and retain Guardians to protect the high ground of space. STARCOM will be instrumental in inculcating a body of knowledge, expertise, and experience required of those Guardians to conduct operations and protect U.S. interests in the high ground of space, a unique operational domain. This approach was first encapsulated in the inaugural doctrine publication, Space Power or Doctrine for Space Forces, issued in August of 2020. Additional activities include more threat-focused unit training syllabi, programs to develop elite cadres of operators, cyberspace warriors, and intelligence and acquisition professionals, increasingly challenging and sophisticated training exercises like Space Flag, and a continuation of our Schriever War Game series that's been a key element for allied and partner engagement for many years. Third, the Space Force is placing major emphasis on modernizing our infrastructure and space installation readiness, and executing a Space Force unique weapon system sustainment portfolio that ensures we maintain readiness of existing space capabilities, even as we begin fielding the advanced capabilities required to meet the evolving needs of the joint force in the face of the growing threat. This approach also recognizes that our people, our guardians, are as vital as the space systems they employ to meeting current and future readiness needs. Without guardians standing at the ready, the nation's space systems cannot operate in the manner required to effectively provide for our security. The Guardian approach adopts new and innovative capital management and talent management methods for civilian and military members alike, under the authorities granted by and with the assistance of Congress. And as documented in our vision for a digital service, released earlier in May, it builds digital fluency into the workforce to ensure the Space Force is able to function effectively in the digital world of today and far into the future. Finally, I must uncategorically state that our success today could not have been possible without fully committed partners in the departments of the Air Force and Defense. That begins with our closest and most committed partner, the United States Air Force, and extends to the sister services represented here today, who are currently and actively engaged in working with us to transfer functions and resources to fulfill critical missions and ensure we provide capabilities that they need for the joint fight. In this, we share a common goal, that is to maintain mission execution and meet warfighter needs without adverse impact to any personnel or to the missions of the other services. On behalf of General Raymond and Secretary Roth, thank you again for the opportunity to appear before you, and I look forward to addressing your questions today.
Thank you very much, General Thompson. And we appreciate having what will be the first of an annual review of the work of the Space Force. And congratulations to you and the men and women of the force for standing it up and operating what is now almost a 2-year period of time. So we thank you for that. There are many, many questions that need to be asked. Many of those are probably answered in your lengthy written testimony. But just a couple of things come immediately to mind. I said earlier that the central theme of this Readiness Subcommittee last year, and as we move into this year, is that the military be prepared for the contingencies of the future. Certainly, that one contingency is the possibility of conflict with an entity somewhere around the world. We talk about near peer, and that's important. But there's also another contingency out there, and that's climate change. We've driven resiliency into much of what we hope you are doing with regard to your installations. And so I would like each of you, and we'll go in reverse order here, because I'm not sure General Thompson has a whole lot to do right now, but if he ever has a specific base, whether it's Colorado or Alabama or some other place, the resiliency issue will be on your shoulders, at least insofar as the base is. So let's go, let's talk about resiliency, how you're addressing that, and then along the way, efforts that you're making to reduce the consumption of greenhouse gas along the way. General Thompson.
Chairman Garamendi, thanks for that. And I will let you know there are in fact Space Force bases and installation under our charge today, on the order of a dozen. I won't go through the entire list. I will tell you they're our responsibility, but our partner, the United States Air Force, is joining with us, and they are operating those bases on our behalf, just as the Air Force, the civil engineers, security forces, personnel, and others have for decades. But they are our responsibility. In terms of climate change, I'll address a few things and save a few of those features for General Alvin to address. But first of all, as you noted, space bases are our power projection platforms. In fact, we operate space systems from those platforms. We do the command and control, the data dissemination. Data lands at those locations and is provided to the Joint Force. And so the resiliency of those bases is incredibly important to us. In conjunction with the Air Force, and especially as we look at lessons learned over the past several years, as we examine our infrastructure, primarily in our case, our facilities and our power infrastructure, as we go through the modernization, sustainment, and sustainment activities, we look for means by which we can take those current facilities today and improve their energy and their installation resilience in the face of many of those climate issues. In the case of ours, it often is hurricanes on the Florida coast, earthquakes and other natural disasters, to include blizzards on the Front Range. And so as we upgrade and sustain those systems, we look for all of them, especially from the standpoint of power resiliency. We ensure that the power is clean, the power is conditioned, the power is sustainable across any sort of natural disaster. And in fact, if in fact we have to sustain ourselves for a 24/7 mission, we build that into our plans. For our future capabilities, our future installations, from the design, from the beginning, we build energy resilience into those designs from the beginning, as well as new methods and new standards for energy efficiency and effectiveness. And let me stop there and allow the other service chiefs to join.
Thank you, General. I had really not spent a lot of time talking about resiliency in space. I know that's an issue of the Strategic Forces Committee as well. I don't know that I want to get into Mr. Cooper's turf, but we might. Since you've focused on the Air Force, let's go to General Albin, and you pick up the question from there, if you would, please. Hit your mute button. Thank you.
Sir, in the interest of time, I'll really add to what General Thompson said and try not to repeat. Specifically, we'll narrow in on the area of climate change. As you know, two of our installations were fell victim to natural disasters that were impacted from the climate, the hurricane that hit Tyndall, and then the massive flooding that was at Offutt. And so as we look to learn from those, we are garnering the lessons learned in reevaluating our uniform facility criteria. So we're looking at adaptation and then the idea of resilience as well. But the adaptation to the effects of climate into the future, we are integrating into our, as we're rebuilding those installations, making sure that we understand not only what today's floodplain is, but the potential trend of those floodplains, and ensure that we're building above those in the case of Offutt, looking at what the rising water levels may be in the case of Tyndall. And so those are the immediate lessons that we're learning to be able to put into the development of the installations of the future. But in the maintenance of our current installations, understanding that it's not only hurricanes and floods, but there are natural disasters, fire and high winds, et cetera. As we're looking at our sustainment requirements across all of our facilities, looking to harden our utilities area against wind, against fire, and that sort of thing. And so we are looking, that's at the adaptation of what the climate is doing to our current installations, but we need to build in, and are looking at in our future design, building digital models to fully understand how we might be able to build that into the installations that we're going to upgrade and update into the future.
General, thank you very much. I noted that there was an evacuation at Beale Air Force Base yesterday because of a fire. So you don't need to talk about that in detail, but it's an example of the problem that you're facing perhaps around the world, but certainly here in the West. Okay, let's turn now to General Thomas, the Marine Corps. Resiliency, we can go into some detail about this issue. If you could talk to us about this, and also about the survivability of some of your bases, if you could. Specifically, I'd like to hear how both Camp Lejeune and your induction center nearby can survive in the face of climate change and existing hurricanes.
Thank you, Chairman. Let me begin with some of the resiliency initiatives that we have undertaken, including making Marine Corps Logistics Albany, for example, our first net zero installation, which produces as much electricity from renewable energy now as it consumes from utility providers. We've also installed two smart grids at Marine Corps Recruit Depot San Diego and Marine Corps Air Station Miramar, which enables continuity of critical infrastructure functions in the event of a power outage. And of course, all of our new MILCON projects will be in accordance with new code, which takes all of these into account. You mentioned, Chairman, Parris Island. In October of last year, we completed the Marine Corps' first climate change adaptation and resilience plan that addresses sea level rise and climate change. And we're going to take that same approach and apply it to some of our other installations, including Camp Lejeune.
I'm going to drive a little bit deeper on this, General. In discussions I've had actually three years ago now, it appeared as though Parris Island could not survive a Category 3 hurricane. And I therefore raised the question about, so where's the next induction center when that one gets wiped out? It won't get wiped out once. It'll be a continued problem with sea level rise. Has the Marine Corps thought about what to do about Parris Island, either in a different location or what might be done given the fact that, I'll say fact, that Parris Island's in jeopardy?
Chairman, based on the climate challenges that you've articulated, in addition to the steps forward that we're taking with integration of recruit training, we are evaluating our facility requirements for recruit training across the board for the reasons you so articulate. We have not yet made any decisions related to recruit training facilities or particular locations.
Very good. I raised this question as a heads up, not only to you, General, but also to the committee, that this issue is going to be before us in the months ahead, perhaps this year, but probably certainly the following year. And we'll be dealing with this issue. Hopefully and prayerfully, there will not be a hurricane that will make this a more immediate issue. Thank you very much, General. There's a whole series of questions that I mentioned before having to do with the Marine Corps of the future. And we'll want to get into those in detail in the days ahead. Admiral Lesher, same set of questions, climate change. You're going to issue waivers for Norfolk?
Sir, yeah, thank you for the question. The focus that we're bringing, very similar to the other services, I would highlight, first of all, of course, the safety of the workforce, resilience of the mission, the ability to execute the mission operationally, and then to preserve our natural resources. And as you highlight with Norfolk and elsewhere, we're laser focused on sea rise as well as the severe weather. And a classic or recent example being Hurricane Sally, which impacted Pensacola, Whitingfield, Panama City. The tools we bring to this work, I think in some respects are mature and in some respects are reflecting the 20 NDAA language. I'm bringing them into installation master plans. We have across our 70 major installations been using the mission assurance assessments, which comprehensively look at all hazard threats to include cyber, floods, earthquake, damaging winds, those type of elements. Analyzes probability of impact and then proposes mitigation based on that. And then in compliance with the 20 NDA, this year we'll have completed 5 installation development plans that have incorporated those mission assurance assessments. And we think we'll be on a vector to complete all of them by the end of 22. So that's really an overarching look at how you will bring the assessments and the planning into the development plans, and then use that to drive choices on mitigating. You also asked about other elements of energy efficiency, and there's many of that. San Diego is a classic example where there's a tremendous amount of solar power that's been put in place. And then operationally as well, we have initiatives on advanced battery development, propulsion efficiency, energy efficient engines for our orders and other elements that we can certainly highlight in more detail with the staff.
Good. Admiral, thank you very much. I would expect one of my colleagues will pick up the issue of the shipyards and questions around the shipyards. So I see Mr. Golden there looking at $250 million. General Martin.
Thank you, Chairman. So over the past 2 years, the Army evaluated all 116 installations using what we call the Army Climate Assessment Tool. We are on glide path to evaluate all Army installations and complete the installation energy and water use plan in accordance with the NDAA by 22 for all of our installations. So no issue there. Last year was the 5th year in a row we continued to grow our renewable capabilities on our installation. As I speak to you, 7.7% of the Army's energy is generated by renewables. But resilience is really important. I got to talk about the Fort Hood example where they had that ice storm last winter, and a good part of mid to North Texas is relying upon a mixture of renewables and natural gas generated power. And when that ice storm came, there was power, but it came at a very high premium because they could not rely upon the renewables for about a week. And so we've thought through that and understanding that you can't rely just 100% on renewables, but they need to be a part of your power generation to be responsible in your power generation and your power requirements. Since 2007, the Army's decreased its use of water by 28.2%. We're in the process. It's not something that's in the program yet, but we are actively planning the grid that we'll need, the infrastructure we'll need to be able to host what we anticipate to be a 100% GSA electrified fleet if that happens, so that we're not, we got the cars, but we can't charge them. And then we just approved about a month ago an effort to electrify. It's a hybrid, but it's the third, and it's the best form of a hybrid, the JLTV, the Joint Light Tactical Vehicle. And so we're looking at that. That's the first big vehicle that we've taken a look at doing with that. But those are some of the efforts that we're doing to decrease our reliance on carbon fuels.
General, thank you very much. I just remembered a conversation with a Marine Corps major, a tanker. We were talking about hybrid vehicles. And he said, if I could have a hybrid tank, you know what it would mean to me? And I said, no, what are you talking about? He said, well, most of the time we sit around, we got the air conditioner going, we got the communications going, and the turbines going too. He said, if that was a hybrid, it would probably be another 15 minutes of fuel. And that means I live. So food for thought. And thank you for the comment on the GSA hybrids and electric vehicles. We would like that to take place. You raised an important question, and that is, okay, what do you plug them into? And so thank you for your work on that. I've gone through a series of questions having to do with installations, the work that we've been doing over the last couple of years. And I'm going to now turn to my colleague, my ranking member. He has on the screen Dale Anderson, who I think must be one of his staff. Mr. Lamborn, you're up.
That's right. We've had some technical difficulties, Mr. Chairman, so I had to switch over to the screen of one of my staffers, like you just said, my chief of staff, to be precise. And thank you for having this hearing. General Thompson, I have a question for you on Space Force. Can you describe to us the need for and the advantages of a reserve component for Space Force and what that would do for readiness?
Representative Lamborn, thanks so much for that. I will tell you, let me start by saying today that the National Guard and the reserves are a vital part of our space missions today. We couldn't execute the missions we do every single day without them. They bring, as you noted, vital surge to war support and other sorts of support that have served the entire armed forces well over the years. At the same time, we've got an opportunity to look as a 21st century at what a 21st regular reserve and guard construct might look like for a brand new service. And we have done exactly that. We spent about a year now inside of the U.S. Space Force, with our counterparts in the Air Guard and the Air Reserve, and with OSD. And I think we've developed a proposal that we believe will serve our needs in the future, but also take advantage of the most important features of the current Guard and Reserve. We owe a report on Congress to that through the Secretary of Defense. It's in its final stages of approval, and we expect it to be submitted soon. And as I said, I can't share details until approved by the Secretary of Defense, but what I'll tell you is we think it's an innovative approach that preserves some of the outstanding features of the Guard and Reserve, but still looks at it through a 21st century lens. We look forward to delivering that report and then working with you on and Congress on the features related to it and the changes that may be required to implement.
Okay, thank you, General. I look forward to seeing that report and helping to make sure that we do enter the next this century and into the future with the best reserve and guard component possible. General Martin, we were talking the other day, and you mentioned that in with the potential, God forbid, but the potential of great power competition concerning the Army, and this is for General Martin, that there would still be a role for the Army, even in like the Indo-Pacific theater. Could you explain a little bit what you elaborate on what you meant by that?
Congressman, thank you. So as I said in my statement, to prevail in the future, to be able to respond to crisis, to win in competition, and prevail in a conflict, you're going to need an all-domain capability to do that. You're going to need an entire joint force. It's not going to be one single service. It's not going to be a couple of services. You're going to need everything from the space to the information environment, to the cyber environment, to the air, to the sea below the sea, and on the land. You're going to need all those capabilities combined. And so as it pertains to the land domain, most of the partners, the potential partners, and you need a partnership to be able to prevail against a threat like China. Most of the partners there live on land, and most of the partner nations there, their largest component of their security apparatus is land forces. And so to build relationships with those land forces matters in a future fight, because we don't want to do that in a crisis or, God forbid, in a conflict. And so it takes time to do that. And so that's where the Army, with its security force assistance brigades and its various units in their exercises, can build upon those relationships that will allow us to achieve access, presence, temporary, episodic presence, but also influence on the development of their military forces, making them better than they were before, and increasing opportunities for not only for the Army to posture capability there to deter, but also for our partners in the joint force to posture capability, dynamically employ capability to those countries that we continue to build relationships with. So the land domain matters, and the Army's at the center of building multinational partnerships there. And we believe we're a valid component of that as we look to the future, both in the Indo-Pacific and also Europe.
Okay, thank you. That does help elaborate on what we were talking about and what you were referring to. Admiral Lesher, you've touched on, and we've had certainly a lot of questions about the recapitalization of the Navy shipyards. Could you elaborate on where we stand currently with the recapitalization plan and where that stands in terms of the years needed to do that, and what we're going to need each year in the budget? And is that included in this year's budget to achieve that goal?
Yes, sir. Thanks for that question. It is included in this budget, and as well a 5-year plan and a 20-year plan. And the 5-year plan, in response to the Chairman's question as well, about let's have some increased specificity with that. In this budget, there's $830 million that's specifically focused on shipyard infrastructure optimization, and that's really focused on 2 specific dry dock improvements, one at Portsmouth and one in Norfolk. And as well, there's ongoing work in terms of doing digital twin modeling of each of our 4 public shipyards and area master plan development. The digital twin models are forecast to be complete across all for the shipyards by FY22. And the digital twin models are core to being able to do the optimization piece. In the 5-year plan, I would say what's most consequential is immediate work on 6 dry docks. So basically getting after that element is important up front. There's also capital equipment investment as well as FSRM as well. The overall level of investments, I would expect it to be north of $4 billion for the five-year plan, and certainly that's work that continues to be done. There's some learning taking place on this. I've had a chance to chat with the professional staff about a bid that came in well above what we expected for the Portsmouth Dry Dock Project 381. And there's some strong learning for us in that, both in terms of current market conditions driving volatility in raw materials, the complexity of these projects, because a pacing element is not just funding, it's the ability to also preserve and do maintenance while we capitalize these shipyards. And we also saw that we didn't have the competition that we would have expected. And it's a well-proven unhappy fact when you come down to a single bidder for these type of projects, there's a price premium played. So I've asked our naval facilities team to take a very hard look at that. Let's be a learning organization. This project is still in negotiation, but then we have to bring that insight into what that means for our 5-year plan as well, and adjust and adapt. We still want to bring a sense of urgency to this. We want to bring a clear sense of prioritization to this. So that in a nutshell is what's taking place in the 5-year plan. The 20-year plan will really reflect that learning from the digital twin modeling, the optimization approach that we see, as well as continue to prioritize recapitalization of specific infrastructures.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. And General Alvin, this is my last question, and you already have talked about this in your opening statement, but when it comes to the fighter pilot shortage, you gave some good and specific measures, like I believe retention bonuses and so on, and those are good steps. Is it too early to tell whether this is being successful or not and driving some higher numbers? Or is it still perspective in the future and we're waiting to see how it comes out?
Thank you, Representative Lamborn. I would say more the former than the latter. And the reason why I would say this is we are looking at 6 specific initiatives. So first of all, we'll talk about the retention. The retention is great because right now we're at a current pilot shortage of 1,925 pilots, give or take, of what we think we need. So we targeted 1,500 pilots a year of production to be able to get there. Unfortunately, we haven't met that in the last couple of years. We expected actually it to be a little bit worse through 19 because of COVID. As it turned out, we only produced, or in 20, we only produced 13 less than the year before. Still not satisfactory because we hadn't hit 1,300 yet. So it says that the bathtub didn't get worse, but that was the only real good news. So the initiative, the 6 separate initiatives that we're looking to increase pilot throughput, to get more production in there, are all, each one of them could provide a significant uplift. And I'll go over them very quickly. First is we're understanding that you do not have to put everyone through the same pipeline. We're learning more about the capabilities outside of the Air Force and how to do proper risk management in assessing potential pilot candidates. So on the accelerated path to wings, we're doing a small pilot group and evaluating them and taking them just through the T1 only program, and then assessing them as they go through the first few years in their follow-on actual weapon system. So to your point of, do we know if we've actually got the right solutions yet? I think we'll gain confidence every year as we see them perform down the line, because the most important thing, we can put quantity through, but we can never sacrifice quality. So we evaluate each of those, these increased pilot production through the T1 path to wings. We're going back to just sending potential aviators right to helicopter training. We did that in years past. Then we started putting them through fixed wing. We're going back to the future. We're evaluating their performance. As you can see, that's less time in the training pipeline. It's more pilots on the line. We're also looking at ensuring we can put instructor pilots on the line doing instruction, flying instruction. We're doing that through some increased civilian incentives for civilians doing simulation, doing the simulators, so overseeing the simulator instruction. And also maybe incentivizing remote simulator instruction, because some of the places are hard to attract some of the civilian workforce talent, to ensure we can fully man the simulators with civilians, so we can put the instructor pilots back on the line, so we can move more pilots through the pipeline. So both of those are ways that we're looking at increasing production. Also looking at, through civilian path to wings, assessing people early on and looking at their civilian experience and see if what we might be able to shorten their pilot training experience. In the past, it didn't matter. Didn't matter if you were experienced pilot or brand new, you went through the same pipeline. Didn't really make sense. As we're looking at each of those, they offer the opportunity, when you put them all together, to really produce about one additional base's worth of pilot production per year. And our target for knowing that will be about FY24. But we want to make sure we're assessing each of these and figuring out where we might want to put more emphasis. And as we do that, we'll put more pilots through the pipeline, but then we also have to manage them throughout their career to make sure the bathtub doesn't move just from company grade officers to field grade officers. So we need to manage them through their entire life cycle. And that will be a challenge going forward, but we have several irons in the fire that are starting to produce some outputs we're going to evaluate to see which ones are the most lucrative of an investment.
Okay, these sound like good plans, and I want to, and the whole committee would love to see the results as you go forward. It is somewhat tentative, so I'm, not convinced yet that this is going to succeed, but I'm hopeful that it will, and I appreciate you keeping us abreast of this as we go forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back to you.
Mr. Lamborn, thank you very much for your questions. The next two on the gavel list are Mr. Courtney, followed by Mr. Wilson. On the completion of Mr. Courtney, I'll give the following two after that. So go ahead, Mr. Courtney, you're up.
Great. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all the witnesses. Admiral Lesher, as I think you know, before the budget came out, this subcommittee had a hearing on the backlog in ship repairs for both submarines and surface ships. Your update regarding the funding for the public shipyard improvements, I think it shows real effort, but on the other hand, it certainly shows that's still going to be a long game, and that we obviously still have to deal with what's happening in the immediate present, as far as particularly the Los Angeles class submarines, who, as we heard previously, is sort of at the end of the buffet line in terms of getting help. So I did notice on page 3 of your testimony that Boise is now fully funded to go into Newport News, and the Hartford is fully funded to go into Groton, which is good. I guess if maybe we could just talk for a second about whether or not, hopefully, we're figuring out ways to not only get them in, but also to get them out faster. And I know the Smart Start approach, which is to try and get some of the public yards and the private yards sort of talking to each other and working together about getting materials and design plans to move the process along. I mean, is that hopefully, going to get these boats turned around faster than we've seen in the past?
Sir, it's a superb question, and it has to, and it's not just those elements, the Smart Start and the other elements. We're going to put a strong premium on sharing the lessons of learning, the body of knowledge that we're bringing into the public shipyards with our private shipyard partners as well. And I see elements when I talk to the private shipyard leadership that lead me to believe we need to have a stronger conversation on this dimension. For example, when I see their assessment of the percent of new work or growth work is substantially different than what we see in our public shipyards doing the same maintenance availabilities, which I conclude we need to come to a common side picture on that planning and have more of that in the contract and less of that as newer growth work. Our 4 shipyard CEOs are under the leadership of Nancy Dolinas and his executive director Yao Fan. They're on a strong path with what we call naval sustainment system shipyards to drive productivity increases in ways that I think are applicable and ought to be brought into both the surface ship private shipyards and our private shipyards doing through maintenance. Everything from production control as well. We see first and second line supervisors that they are an opportunity to have them more involved and drive productivity better. So I'll hold there, but I have the same side picture you do, which is we need to strengthen that conversation, strengthen the learning together, and get after bringing these private shipyard nuclear submarine repairs through at velocity.
No, and I mean, clearly, like I said, I think there's strong support across the board for boosting the public yards, but I think in the meantime, it's just the handwriting's on the wall. I mean, we're still going to have to sort of use the one shipyard approach for the private and public sector. General Thomas, last time you were with us, we talked about the devastating AAV accident out in San Clemente, and I was just wondering whether you could sort of talk a little bit about whether what's in the budget is going to address in terms of training or the equipment, in terms lessons learned from that accident.
Thank you, Congressman. There are a couple of key aspects of that are in the 22's budget. First, of course, is the sustainment of the vehicle, which will be fully funded through the end of the service life in 25 or 26. But it also includes some key investments for systems that did not perform well. Communications and some of the lighting on board, for example. And then also significant investment in training. We're adding some egress training as well as the underwater egress training to ensure that our Marines and sailors are fully prepared should they find themselves in an emergency.
Well, again, thank you. I know, both of these issues which I've raised are something that are going to be an ongoing, enduring issue for the subcommittee, and certainly, I'm glad that there's space in this budget to follow up with again a lot of the comments, particularly addressed to the families after that accident. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Courtney. Mr. Wilson, you'll be up next, followed by Golden and Scott. Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Chairman John Garamendi and Ranking Member Doug Lamborn, for your leadership. And we are all inspired by the witnesses today, their commitment, their service on behalf of the American families, defending American families. And this should, and it will be, bipartisan, working together to back you up in every way that we can. Along with that, I'm really grateful that I represent Fort Jackson, South Carolina, where Brigadier General Milford Beagle and his team have just been masterful in adapting and overcoming the challenges of the Wuhan virus. Fort Jackson trains more than 50% of the Army's new warriors, and I commend the Army on maintaining 100% capacity of its training capabilities despite the pandemic. My concern is the impact on readiness, and this is for General Martin, with above the tactical level. The pandemic caused the cancellation of numerous partnered exercises, including exercise Maple Resolve, Panama 2021, Command Post Exercise CPX, and the Allied Spirit 12. Does the FY22 budget general request provide for sufficient funding to reschedule the training events and to regain the interoperability readiness?
Congressman, thank you for the question. And so it was very unfortunate with COVID and the impacts on our ability to be able to train with our multinational partners. That being said, we did do Defender Europe and we did a smaller Defender Pacific, both exercises smaller scale, and the training with our partners in those various exercises was a direct byproduct of what they were allowed to do and what we were allowed to do, given protecting our soldiers and protecting their soldiers during the conduct of those exercises. We've learned a lot through the course of this year. The 22 budget has many multinational training opportunities in it. In fact, in 22, we've got Project Convergence 22. This year, as you well know, is going to be a joint campaign of learning where all of our joint partners are going to participate. We've got multinational partners that are actually going to come and watch and discuss what they see as far as the developments in project conversions this year. And then next year, it's going to be in 22. It's going to be a multinational event working on the mission partner environment and the multinational interoperability capabilities. And so we've got lots of exercises programmed in 22, ready to go, and anticipating that we will be well beyond the herd immunity for COVID, and our partners will have made progress. We shouldn't have any problems with that. So we look forward to those opportunities. And I can tell you, I talk to our partners often, and they miss those opportunities, and they miss the progress that we missed because we had to protect our soldiers. But we've learned, and we're moving forward, and the program includes a robust multinational experimentation and exercising schedule for your Army.
And I share your appreciation. I've traveled with Chairman Garamendi throughout Central and Eastern Europe, and to see our allies, our new allies there, how much they appreciate Novo Cello, MK, to be working together. And so I'm grateful this will proceed. General Alvin, and your written testimony, I appreciate your recognition of the importance of our nuclear recapitalization efforts to the credibility of our nuclear deterrence. In the FY21 National Defense Authorization Act, this committee recommended a two-site plutonium pit production plan to recapture our nation's ability to build and maintain nuclear weapons to provide deterrence for peace. What is the Air Force doing to modernize its leg of the nuclear triad, and specifically, what are the cost implications of another potential Minuteman life extension?
Sir, thank you very much for the question. I think fundamentally, we really believe that the cost of the recapitalization of the nuclear fleet is actually something, it's an imperative. We're trying to drive down costs, but we go against what we believe the threat is. This, our nuclear triad has been the foundation of strategic deterrence for well over half a century. And so the recapitalization is something that is necessary. There have been several independent assessments on the cost of doing anything other than that. And to your point about the cost of another recapitalization of Minuteman III, there are several studies that show that it becomes increasingly expensive to the point of the diminishing parts, and the capability would almost require building a brand new Minuteman III. And the idea is, if you're building capability to provide a credible deterrent, you'd want to have that deterrent to be against the threat that you see coming. And so therefore our GBSD, which is as a matter, it is not inexpensive, but it is one of our programs that, through our new digital acquisition approach and our way of doing our modeling and baking in sort of long-term sustainment costs and all those things into it and holding the requirements for them, it is actually meeting schedule and cost in a way that really very few programs have ever in the history. So it is not inexpensive, but it is unaffordable not to have that sort of a nuclear deterrent in the world that we find ourselves now and into the future.
Thank you for your input. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. This last subject will be debated going forward. Let's see, we have Mr. Golden, you're up next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Admiral Lesher, I'd like to talk about the readiness impact of the Navy's FY22 budget request. I'm concerned that despite making clear to this committee that it requires additional anti-air and ballistic missile defense capability in order to operate in a contested security environment, particularly in the Indo-Pacific region, that the current request before the committee cuts a Flight 3 DDG-51 destroyer in contravention of not only the Navy's stated shipbuilding planning guidance, but also the current DDG-51 multi-year procurement contract. And I am, of course, concerned that this proposed cut in DDG-51 production, which is the backbone of our nation's frontline surface combatants, is occurring at a time when our Navy requires more and not less capabilities, particularly anti-air and ballistic missile defense capabilities, to address the increasingly lethal capabilities, including advanced anti-access area denial capabilities of our potential adversaries, most prominently China. The Flight 3 DDG's unique capabilities, including strategic land strike, anti-aircraft, anti-surface ship, and anti-submarine warfare, are crucial for keeping pace with China's evolving military capabilities in the Indo-Pacific region. I would say in particular, the Flight 3 Spy-6 radar system is crucial for addressing the Chinese anti-access area denial and ballistic missile threat to our forces in the Pacific. And the current ballistic missile threat, as well as the proposed retirement of 7 Ticonderoga-class guided missile destroyers, makes the potential air and ballistic missile defense impact of a cut in the DDG program even more concerning. These proposed cuts impact not only the readiness of our current naval force structure and capabilities, but also the readiness of our sailors to gain necessary experience in addressing air defense command vessels, as these cuts would eliminate potential air defense command opportunities with no foreseeable alternatives. I believe these ships are vital in providing necessary command opportunities for naval career officers. So could you please describe both the impact of these cuts on the Navy's anti-air and ballistic missile capabilities, particularly our ability to be ready to operate in a contested environment in the Indo-Pacific, but also what is the Navy's plan for maintaining large surface combatant command opportunities?
I appreciate the question, Representative. I think it for sure is worthy of a strong and ongoing conversation. I would highlight as a couple elements of context and then get into some details behind that as time permits. CNO and the Secretary of the Navy have been very clear with this budget that the first principle that drove many of these hard decisions, and as you well appreciate, this isn't the only difficult decision in this balance. The first principle is to provide the most ready and lethal Navy that's achievable within the resources provided. And this was a very deliberate decision and very analytically founded. And we've briefed the committees on elements of that analysis in the Future Naval Force Study and Integrated Naval Force Structure Assessment and related analysis, mission level analysis. Within that first principle, provide the most ready and lethal Navy within the resources provided. The fiscal context is relevance. I highlighted it briefly in my opening verbal statement. I'll just highlight as another element the context. In FY18, we had a budget that supported a fleet of 286 ships. In FY22, we are submitting a budget that supports a fleet of 296 ships, and it's essentially the same level budget in real terms, in constant dollars, within 1% of each other. That's not a system of continue to grow the Navy, and it requires these types of hard decisions. So the fundamental question on the second DDG in FY22 is not, is this a valuable ship? The question is, what would come out of the balance we have that we would say would to resource the second ship? And I'll just highlight for you how that conversation. Other to get the urgent need. Say on those unfunded the priority list. Would we reduce that? No, of course we need to get after and close gaps in manning. What about ship depot maintenance? We want to drive and are committed to not having a hollow force. What about spares and ordnance? Again, our choice is to not pull parts off the shelf or put ordnance out of magazines to buy capacity that can't be fully balanced resource from a readiness perspective. In terms of networks, in terms of infrastructure, the same sorts of things apply, including the imperative of the investments in shipyard infrastructure. And then there's modernization as well we could look at. And our site picture there is across a DDGX, SSNX, Next Generation Air Dominance. All of those elements are critical in this budget. And so I'm sketching for you just an awareness of the hard choices, but the very deliberate choices, the very analytically based choices that led to the balance you see there. So hopefully that's helpful to answer that question.
I'm out of time, so Mr. Chair, I'm certainly ceding back. I appreciate the response and look forward to continuing this conversation in future hearings.
Thank you, Mr. Golden, and appreciate your awareness of time. Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And at the end of my questions, I'm going to have to step off for another Armed Services meeting. I do want to mention just briefly, and I know the Admiral brought up bids coming in higher than expected. I do think that and would be interested in any written responses, but will not have time for responses orally here. That the supply chain disruptions that we're seeing throughout the world, the increased cost of steel, and the other things along those lines that are going to create constraints with regard to procuring new equipment and repairing old equipment. I mean, even down to the cost of wire today being significantly higher than it was just a few months ago. Interested in any comments that you may have on that, time permitting, or in writing if you so see fit, but not necessarily, but just want to make sure we're paying attention to that as we push forward. But General Alvin, I want to focus on the advanced battle management system with my first question. It's obviously critical to the readiness of the force and in the future to defeat our peer competitors. Can you explain ABMS in a concise and simple way and just describe how it's central to our future force design?
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, Congressman Scott, for that. I believe I can. I think sometimes the terms become very complex, but the idea is very simple. It's command and control. It's as old as warfare. There's always been the need for senior leadership in the execution of a battle to have better situational awareness than the adversary, to understand what the adversary is doing. So ancient warfare, they sent out scouts, and they would run. The fastest scout would find out and get the information, and they would send them in different directions, and they would come back and they would aggregate that information to help the commander make the decisions about battle. You go through warfare, and then it was on horseback, and it was carrier pigeons. But the idea was you wanted to be able to connect and be able to have the information aggregated in a way that paints a picture for you that advantages you in that battle. And in its essence, it's really not that much different when you think about the Advanced Battle Management System and how it feeds into Joint All-Domain C2, is that now there are many sensors everywhere. So the important part is to be able to bring these sensors together, that all these sensors and platforms that were designed as individual platforms and not designed to be as part of a network, we need to spend the time, the money, and the effort to connect them, to put them together with the massive computing processing power in order to take that sensor information, turn it into decision quality information, and then use that across all domains to help the commanders decide where we should prosecute the fight, what we need to defend, what we need to attack. The things that we're going after, are they going to be there in 5 minutes, in 2 minutes, in 1 minute? And so it's that speed. That advanced battle management system connects all of the sensors together, connects them, and makes sense of the environment, and provides the commander with the information he or she may need to prosecute the battle. And that's as simple, as concise as I can make it.
General, one of the big debates right now and the decisions that Congress and the leadership of the military is having to make decisions on is the maintenance of legacy systems versus new technology. And I've been a little taken back at what we pay to maintain some of the legacy fleets for what pretty simple parts, just not readily available. The Air Force has an advanced technology and training center in Warner Robins, Georgia. It is using new technologies like 3D printing. What are investments in these new technologies like 3D printing and robotics and artificial intelligence that you've included in the fiscal year 22 budget? What are they helping us do to maintain the Air Force's commitment to those legacy fleets? And does the Air Force maintain the 3-depot strategy?
Congressman, I'll answer the last question first, since it's the easiest one. And yes, we are committed, and the 22 budget reflects that commitment to a 3-depot strategy. I like that you brought up the idea of some of these new and exciting technologies in advanced manufacturing, 3D printing and the like, because they are offering opportunities for us as we transition to the force that we need in the future to be able to make that more of a graceful transition, because we understand that the capabilities that we have are things that combatant commanders are asking for today. But if we solely focus on just servicing that need, then we'll have a perfectly ready force today and we'll be broken tomorrow, and we can't give that to the next generation. So those sorts of technologies and capabilities allow us to sort of gracefully move as we can to provide resources to invest in the new while we are sort of gracefully aging out the old. And I would say, so in FY22, We have in the manufacturing science and technology, we've got an additional 12 million and another 91 million looking at some of these product applications and how we characterize materials and things. So we've got over 100 million just in that particular space, because we see that as critical on our path to transition to the force we need to be ready in the future as well, sir.
Thank you, General. Ultimately, I think it saves us a lot of money. My time's expired and I have to step off to talk about what we're going to name General Martin's bases.
Well, before you go, it may be useful for this committee to ask the services to have an advanced manufacturing seminar at one of the depots, and invite all of the folks out there that have new ideas about how to do manufacturing to come and strut their stuff. Because I know I hear, and I suspect all of you do also, different concepts, different idea about how you can make something that's no longer available in the market.
Chairman, love to have you at Robbins Air Force Base. We volunteer.
Well, we're going to take bids and we'll see who provides the best ice cream. Moving on here. What's next? Better get this computer up. Miss Elaine Lurie, followed by Mr. Green.
Well, thank you. Admiral Lesher, I'd start out by saying I'm very disappointed by the Navy budget submission, and I assume you are too. Firstly, I wanted to say this is not yours or Admiral Gilday's fault, because honestly, you've been handed a bag of you-know-what from your predecessors going back 20 years. There's lots of things wrong with the budget. I don't have time to cover them all, so I just wanted to start with the divest to invest strategy. Noting that in the 2007 budget, we also used the divest to invest words in order to build the LCS, the DDG 1000, and the Ford. And I hope that we're not heading towards the same mistakes today. I noted in this budget that you cut weapons procurement, you cut aircraft procurement, ship procurement, and education, but increased R&D by 12.4%. Including continued R&D for the Ford 25 years after the CVN 21 Program Office was established. Looking back in FY19, you said that you would build 11 ships in FY22. Then in FY20, you dropped that to 9 ships in 22. In FY21, you had dropped that to 7, but with an ending overall fleet size of 306. And today you have a present budget that cuts 1 DDG, decoms 7 cruisers, and results in a fleet size of 296. That's a change of 10 from just last year. So when I was a kid, I used to love to watch that cartoon Popeye. And honestly, this budget reminds me of the character Wimpy, who says, "I'll gladly pay you Tuesday for a hamburger today." So what I'd say is this budget does not advance our near-term realities of China. And I've heard many Navy leaders saying, well, just wait for our FY23 submission. And yet we see a memo yesterday from Acting Secretary Harker saying that you're only going to get to pick one major program. And we know that the priority maintains the Columbia. So I wanted to focus on something that you gave in your testimony. You said that the Navy steamed 23,000 days last year. At first that sounded like a lot, and then I started thinking 23,000 divided by 365 days, that equals 63 ships per day on average across the year underway, so 21% of the fleet. In the budget book you submitted, it says that average daily deployed ships was 110 in FY21, so that's a difference of about 50 ships. And moreover, what's getting masked in there is that there's a very small number of ships doing the lion's share of the work and many others that can't deploy. So I wonder if you could comment on the delta between that number of the 23,000 days steamed and the budget book that says 110 underway per day.
Okay, thank you for the question, and many elements there for me to respond to, so I'll just work through the order. I'm confident that this is the strongest balance in alignment with the strategic guidance, the pacing threat with the resources we have. Like I said, it's very deliberate choices, very analytically derived, and eager to continue to work with the committees to show that underpinning in this balance. You highlighted the POM 23 memo from the Secretary. I'll just highlight that that's obviously very early in the POM 23 process, but to this point, that we have to make choices about phasing SSNX, DDGX, next generation air dominance. That's not a new concept. And I've seen some of the media interpretation that, hey, it's pick one. I believe the secretary said, pick one to prioritize, but fundamentally, it's the conversation that we had both in this budget cycle and will continue to have, which is we have to prioritize within affordable levels how to create not only current readiness, but future overmatch. And that's for sure the lens that is being brought to this. And then that balance of how much current readiness, much ready to fight tonight, and your Navy is absolutely ready and lethal to fight tonight, versus how much to continue to advance capability for advantage in the future is essentially the calculus you see in this budget. It's why you see the R&D in the proportion that you observe. And I think that's the right element. In terms of the figure in the budget book versus my testimony, I will happily take that for the record and reconcile the differences that you noted.
Okay, well, thank you, and I would look forward to knowing that and having further conversations about this balance. But something we did talk about in our conversation yesterday that I found very encouraging, you mentioned something called Task Force Greyhound, something I had been talking about in reference to the OFRP, the Optimized Fleet Response Plan, potentially using more of an FDNF model for some of our forces based in CONUS. I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on that and how this budget would support that.
For sure. First, I'll observe from a budgetary perspective, it's essentially neutral to perhaps some slight increased cost over outside the current budget year. The concept that you talked about is to respond to an operational need for increased readiness in our cruise dev ships out of Norfolk and Mayport, with a small pilot. There will be four DDGs to field 2 additional ready DDGs. To your point, with an excursion from the Optimized Fleet Response Plan, more FD&F-like, which is say more frequent, smaller availabilities, so incremental availabilities and continuous maintenance availabilities, the CMAPs that you're well aware of. So we will move forward to do this tailored maintenance, to do this, again, this excursion from FASIC OFRP, both to generate some increased ASABO operational availability in crew desk, and then to learn and to see if, as I told you in our conversation, it's not a complete no-brainer. There is some learning to be involved in terms of what does it mean in terms of the executability of the maintenance. But we think it's a strong approach, and it reflects, to your point, much of the conversation that you had about other excursions off the OFRP baseline.
Well, thank you. And I just wanted to note that I think it does, like you said, increase operational availability, which in effect can increase the effective size of the fleet. So in fact, if we can get more out of the ships we have, use them more efficiently, it's as though we have a larger fleet. So I'm very encouraged by this idea. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back the remainder of my time.
Thank you, Ms. Luria. We now turn to Mr. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate your leadership, and to the ranking member, your leadership, and for putting this together. And I want to thank all of our witnesses today. It's great to get this chance to hear their perspectives. My question is going to start with the oldest of the services. General Martin, I'll start with you if that's okay. I represent Fort Campbell, Kentucky, which happens to be about 85% in Tennessee. I guess the senator at the time had a little more power and the flagpole went to Kentucky, but most of those individuals, a good portion of them live in my district, and it's important to me, the 101st Airborne Division, the 160th SOAR, and 5th Special Forces Group. As I look at the budget, it doesn't appear to me that there are any significant cuts to those units and to that installation. I just want to confirm from you that in this budget, there aren't significant cuts to Fort Campbell.
Congressman, there are no significant cuts to Fort Campbell that I'm aware of.
Thank you for that, and I really appreciate I think Fort Campbell's strategic footprint, particularly with its airfield, the size of its airfield, and its deployability. Because of that, really appreciate the wisdom there. We've got some significant problems with our barracks in the 1st Brigade. Mold. They move the troops out, they clean it up, they put them back in, mold reappears. It's really time for those barracks to go. We keep pushing it to the top of the list. DoD keeps pushing it to the bottom of the list. I'd like to ask if you would just take a personal interest in that. For me, that would be important. We've got to get those barracks replaced. My next question, obviously our brigade combat teams are the fighting force of the United States Army and the 101st here, with 3 infantry brigade combat teams and then aviation assets, et cetera. Can you kind of describe for me how the rearm program is going to work to make sure they're ready to fight and fight a near peer?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. What rearm's going to do for the Army is it's going to allow us to create an environment of predictability to maintain a ready Army now, regionally align our various units with regions of the world, unless of course they're part of the global response force, and we can't talk about that on this particular network as to who is who, but it will provide each of our units purposeful direction, purposeful timing, and it'll allow them to train for future deployment requirements, be ready to deploy for those deployment requirements. But unlike with our 4th-gen, which we all knew from the past, where in our 4th-gen, if you were going to modernize, you had to do that simultaneously, and it had to compete with your time for training or when you're resetting the unit after coming back from combat. Well, in this particular case, in these 8-month blocks that we're going to allocate for modernization, that's all you're going to do. You're going to divest old equipment and you're going to draw new equipment. And the Army's synchronizing all of its activities in terms of modernization and the activities of our operational units to synchronize to a level that we have never seen before. And it's going to literally drive activity. We'll make decisions based on who we want to have what when, and so that our units that are more likely to have to deploy next will be the most modernized units in the Army. So we really look forward to it. I appreciate the question because it's something we've been working on really hard. It'll be at full operational capability by 2022. And I know you wanted to move on to the question, but I do commit to taking a look to Fort Campbell to see what we can do to help with the infrastructure there as we continue to make our investments with our facilities infrastructure investment plan.
Well, thanks for that. And one last question, because it looks like I'm running out of time, and I'll ask it very quickly. It looks like the Indo-PACOM commander is really demanding a lot from the Army. Can you tell me, how those assets are being utilized, and is it on a rotational basis? Is it going to be, and then what's the downstream effect, to the Army as a whole?
Congressman, there are units that rotate on a predictable cycle, and there's units that rotate there as they exercise. And then with this dynamic force employment, we are actually deploying units there to practice our emergency deployment readiness exercises and what have you. And so there's a multitude of different ways that the combatant command asks for and we support with our forces there. I'm told that we make up about 58% of his joint requests during the course of any given year with the rotational exercise and other like joint requirements requested by the combatant command.
My time has expired. I'll submit a couple of other questions in writing, and I appreciate everyone being here in the testimony.
Mr. Green, thank you very much. Also, you proved what I know is a truism, and that is all politics are local. Every one of us have mentioned our own districts. You did mention something that applies to all of us, I believe, and that's the barracks situation. We are investigating the possibility of a public-private partnership, a significant improvement on the base housing program, in which a barracks could be built as a modern apartment building might be built by an apartment developer. We're looking at that. The Army did this some time ago, probably maybe a decade or so ago. We're looking at that as a possibility, and it would probably be across all the services that are here. And it might solve this funding problem. It does provide a specific, a known and presumably a well-behaved tenant. So we'll move on here. I believe we have Ms. Spear, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member. I'm going to ask 3 questions at the outset and then ask Admiral Lesher, General Alvin, and General Martin to respond. Admiral Lesher, my question to you is, the Navy has seen failed acquisitions, cost overruns in major products, chronic delays in routine maintenance, and I'm finding it hard to understand why the Navy has already started reassigning 200 employees of the Naval Audit Service to non-audit jobs, as it reduces headcount to 85 auditors when you compare it to the Army Audit Agency of 458 and the Air Force at 531. So my question to you is, why is the Navy decimating its internal audit function without consulting Congress? To General Alvin, we all know the flight hours are very important to pilots. However, the cost to operate the F-35A is much higher than expected. It's more like $7 million per tail as compared to about $4 million as it was originally planned. The Navy and Marine variants are also more expensive to operate, but the difference between actual and projected costs is far greater in the Air Force. What explains the extraordinary overruns in the cost of the F-35 to run? And finally, General Martin, what we found at Fort Hood was a toxic command climate that went through every aspect of the installation, and a damning report that followed. You referenced high-risk formations. I don't think Fort Hood is the only one, and I'd like to know what you're doing to ensure command climate data is taken seriously and the commanders are held accountable for fixing the situation. To you, Admiral Lesher.
All right, Alan, well, thanks for the question. I'll start by highlighting that the Navy strongly believes in a spotlight on issues and transparently having a conversation, taking action to correct. And this is more than happy talk. It's essential to much of the trajectory we've seen in improved performance over the past 3 years. I touched on it briefly in my opening statement when I talked about the get real, get better. The audit function in aggregate is core to our get real. Understand what our baseline performance is, then use that to understand how to drive for North Star improved performance. In the particular case of the Navy Audit Service, the site picture of that, and when the acting second was also the Assistant Secretary for Comptroller, he very thoughtfully looked at the scope of work that's being done to illuminate these elements of oversight, monitoring, and remediation. And he looked at the scope of the work across Navy IG, DoD IG, NCIS, the Independent Public Auditor, Management Internal Control Program. And what we see, we look at that, and fundamentally the drive here is to get this in the best aggregate place to drive outcomes. The first thing I observe is that
I'm going to have to cut you off because I want to make sure those other 2 questions get it. I just want you to know that I'm going to be watching because I think that what's happening with this audit function is very disconcerting. And I'll now move to General Alvin, please.
Yes, ma'am. On the question of the difference in the cost per tail per year, I think is what you're referring to, the 4 million versus the 7 million, because as it turns out, the cost per flying hour, actually our projections are very close to what the other services are, and they're bearing out actually a little bit less. But I understand your point about that up to $7.1 million just overall cost of ownership per tail per year. And that frankly was an underestimation we made a long time ago when we early on were looking at the comparison. We thought we had a good reference model. This is 10, 15 years ago with the F-16, and the F-16 was single engine, multi-role, et cetera. And so we frankly underestimated what the overall cost per tail per year was. As the years went on, we continued to look at how we can drive down sustainment and O&M costs, and that is again another story that has a lot of details to it. We have not been able to bring down those costs as we look at that, and so as we try and come up with what the new estimate for the cost per tail per year, as we're sort of finalizing that, we are going to readjust that because that was just a poor underestimation early on in the program, and that's really one of the reasons why when we look at that, as we look at the overall the tactical air study and the future of the fighter force, we are looking at what the real world costs are and how that's going to affect our overall fighter force of the future. But it was an underestimation early on in the program, ma'am.
General Martin.
Congresswoman, I'll start because I know the time's short. That I'll offer the opportunity for myself or my staff to come brief your staff or you on everything that we're doing. But we took what happened at Fort Hood as a wake-up call. And I can tell you, commanders across the board didn't say, "Whew, that wasn't me." They said, "Hey, this could be us. Let's take a look at ourselves." As you probably already know, OSD has launched a new command climate survey, and there's that instrument and many other instruments that we have in the Army that we've combined into a data set that we're developing, because we believe that big data is going to allow us to be able to see formations and potential problems in advance in terms of harmful behaviors or counterproductive climates and cultures in those organizations. I got a lot to say on this and not much time to do it. I'd love to come talk to you about this because I think we're making a lot of headway.
Thank you. Let's do it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Before you leave, Ms. Spear, an issue that came up at a joint hearing with you a month and a half ago was the tragedy of the AAV. And I'm going to turn to General Thomas. I thought that I was waiting to do this until you came. There's been an additional decision made by the Marine Corps concerning that accident. And General Thomas, if you could brief us on it. And that brings us not to a conclusion of that earlier hearing, but to one of the issues that was raised at that hearing regarding command responsibility.
Thank you, Chairman. You're referring to senior leader accountability. I would note that the investigation is still under review, but the bottom line is that the Commandant has determined he has enough information to hold Major General Castelli accountable. Now those actions are ongoing. Will end up with final adjudication with the Secretary of the Navy. The specifics of that we'll share with this committee once that process is complete.
Mr. Chairman, can I just make a comment?
Yes, I'm doing this out of order here. Mr. Moore, you'll be next, but this was the subject of a major hearing, and this was one of the elements that was left open, and we're moving towards a closure of this element. Ms. Spear, please go ahead.
Thank you. I guess my only comment would be what we need to get to the bottom of was why this senior leader was elevated to an inspector general position after he did such a horrific job in allowing those AAVs with sailors and I guess a soldier that was ill prepared to make it. So the real question becomes, why was he elevated? I think we're all in agreement that he shouldn't be serving in that capacity, and that there was a real loss of leadership there. But I continue to have that question. I yield back.
Thank you. We will pick this issue up again at a future hearing, and all of the committee will be notified of the specific situation. I understand that there was a 3 p.m., I assume East Coast time, a release of information, which I believe General Thomas summarized, that an action is being taken against General Castelli. As to what exactly it is, it's unknown. Is that correct, General?
That's correct. It's just from a due process standpoint, Chairman, it still has to go up to the Secretary of the Navy. But I'm happy to address either now or later date Congresswoman Spear's concerns, and be happy to come talk with her or in any form that you desire.
Please inform the entire committee, and certainly Ms. Spear's committee on the personnel side of it has a specific interest, as do we. Thank you, Mr. Moore. We appreciate you standing by for a few moments. It's your turn.
No worries, Chairman. Chairman, I've got a particularly loud HVAC unit behind me. Can you hear me okay?
Speak as loud as you can and keep going.
Okay, thank you. Let me continue on with the trend of talking about our districts and making politics as local as possible. I also welcome the depot work and doing something of that nature. I'm co-chairing the depot caucus And so just a quick non-shameless plug, because it is a topic of utmost importance, would welcome that. I've spent a lot of time this district work period actually visiting a lot of advanced manufacturing in our area near Hill Air Force Base, and there is an amazing amount of expertise and efficiencies that these individuals, these companies are finding. So I welcome that, and I also look to that as a productive way to talk about the F-35 and what we need to do there. I've equally pushed on as many different angles as possible to get into to what we need to do to reduce that cost per flight hour. I've appreciated the Air Force. I've appreciated every airman and every pilot that I've spoken with about this. And I know there is the right effort and awareness that's going on, and I welcome that opportunity to continue to dive into that. I've found to be very productive individuals that are willing to dig in, and my office is also at the ready to help bolster that and be a part of the solution instead of just talking about the problem. So I open up to I just again highlight that need for depot work. There's a lot of solutions in that side of things, and we'll continue to push that. A few of my questions today will be mostly for General Alvin. I want to talk just workforce briefly again. The question is do you feel, or does the Air Force lack qualified candidates for the ability to hire what they need? And let me lead the witness a little bit, if you don't mind. That really good. We've had some success in the maintenance community, but there does remain a gap in experience. And in order to get to a journeyman role, it takes sometimes upwards to 3 years. And I'm concerned about some of the replacement deficiency gap. Could you speak to that, just as far as general workforce and hiring what you need?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. It certainly is a challenge in this particular environment. It is a competitive environment. We are making headway on that. It continues to be a challenge, as I said, but the idea that it's not only just the skill set that we need, but we're working on our outreach programs to find areas in which those for a propensity to serve, and by serve, it doesn't necessarily mean in uniform. It means serve our nation and serve our Air Force in these capacities. So we are reaching out, looking for those maybe the non-traditional areas, also on our path to include increase the diversity of our workforce. There may be talent out there that we hadn't accessed through the traditional sort of pipelines through which we get a workforce. So I would commend you to the fact that it's not only just our STEM outreach and that sort of the efforts that we're doing to reach them in non-traditional, in community colleges, in areas where we have direct access to where they can see and be a part of the Air Force early on. And then once they can see what they're a part of, they're hooked in many cases. And so we're reaching out through those sort of apprenticeships as well, but also in many of the underserved colleges, the historically Black colleges and universities, and some of the other diverse parts of our nation where we haven't traditionally looked before. It's a competitive environment because technology is doing nothing but increase, and that's where this is more. It's not your traditional engineer, as you know, sir. So we're reaching out with a lot more outreach to be able to do that. We think it's a challenge. We think the Air Force has a lot to offer, and so we're being a little bit more creative about where we go.
Excellent, thank you. Some of the statistics that I'll throw out quickly, and to the extent that the Air Force is using these measures or these statistics to adequately plan, I think is very important, and I would love any thoughts you had on that. But by 2023, 30% of the Air Force Sustainment Center federal wage grade employees will be eligible to retire, and by 2028, that'll be over 50%. Is that all being taken into consideration with regards to replacing that workforce?
It is, and those as you mentioned them there, those are sobering statistics, because much like we've had issues with in areas such as aircraft maintenance in the past, and we got a significant uplift in order to recruit new maintainers. But how long does it take to train a 7-year mechanic? 7 years. So the idea of being able to also look at not just ingesting from the very youngest level, but be able to attract those in industry, as we see industry is so much more mobile these days. The opportunity to serve, and we're looking at the permeability of our force, the opportunity to be able to serve for periods of time, and that's a little bit more accessible in the civilian community. So we're looking at those opportunities to take in mid-career level folks and be able to have that level of expertise, so we don't just take out the old and have a huge experience bathtub with brand new, young and energetic, but less than experienced technicians on that. So we are looking at sort of mid-career and the permeability of inviting them into the force as well.
Thank you, General. And my time is up. I will submit a question, just General Thompson, to flag for you. Your thoughts on Space Force and a National Guard component, reserve component for that type of work. Great topic. Would love to get into it. Maybe next time we have an opportunity, but we'll submit it for the record.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. One of our colleagues raised that question early on. I think it was Mr. Lamborn. And we'll share that response with you in more detail. We've now completed, as far as I know, looking at the screen and from the staff, the first round of questions. I'm going to forego another round of questions because I might have to leave at any moment to go off and vote on the T&I surface transportation bill. But I'm going to be here for a while. So I'm going to forego questions. Mr. Lamborn, do you have another round of questions?
No, Mr. Chairman, I do not.
That's either a no or you're shaking off a fly or a mosquito. Moving on here. Let's see, Ms. Luria, you're still there. Would you like to follow up?
Mr. Chairman, I'll pass.
Well, the way this is working out, let's see, the only other person on the screen that I can see is Mr. Courtney, who is not there at the moment. So I'll go to Ms. Spear.
Mr. Chairman, I think my questions can be answered in private meetings with the various
Very good.
leaders.
All right, then Mr. Courtney is back.
Sorry. Are you asking if I need to have any other questions, John, a second round?
That's correct.
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you. I'll pass.
Well, that brings us back to Mr. Moore, where we started this.
Knowing that the reserve question was highlighted in Lambert, I was in the middle of traffic at the time. I can look to that and work with my team on it. I think it's a great topic and appreciate that it's already been asked. So I am good and will pass for any further questioning. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay. Well, then I'm going to do two things. First of all, I want to compliment Wendell White. I don't see his face on the screen, but if he wants to pull up his face, he turn on his television if he can. He is new to our professional staff. This is the first full committee in which he's taken the responsibility. And Wendell, you did a great job. I'll applaud you, and the rest of us will recognize the good work that you have done. And thank you so very, very much. Also, there's ongoing questions, many of which were not raised in this hearing. We'll come back on those sets of questions. I want to thank the presenters, General Thompson, General Thomas, General Martin, General Alvin, and Admiral Lesher. Thank you very much, not only for this, but also for the individual meetings that you've taken a great deal of time to do with members of the committee. It's most helpful. We know that we will be working together to deal with the national security issues. We may or may not see things the same way you do, but you have really an opportunity and in fact, a requirement to persuade us that the view of the world that you have is the correct one. And I suppose we have the same opportunity and responsibility. And so the discussions go on and on. Really appreciate working with all of you. Look forward to a continuation of our work. And with that, this Readiness Subcommittee is adjourned. Thank you all very much. Bye now.